We are live fans with another edition of the Cheap Heat Productions Wrestling Podcast. My name is Jack Kilby, Executive Vice President of Great North Wrestling. And before we introduce our esteemed guest, I'd like to welcome to his own show, Maurice Shortall. How are you, sir?
Good, Jack. Thanks for that lovely introduction. I just want to say before we continue that it's been a good week for the channel. We're up about 300% on views and subscribers. So really appreciate everyone for checking us out. And we've got a great guest for you here today, a man we're going to discuss his extensive wrestling career. And it's DC Drake joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. Much appreciated.
Excellent. We always love having people on, and like you've got a really rich history in the business, and we're going to kick into that. I think Jack is going to start us off.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Don, what interested me right off the hop when I was reading into your career was how you started a number of companies, but going back to when you were a youngster, you started your own backyard fed. I'm always interested to hear how that came about.
Well, I certainly was a fan all my life. One of the things I remember the most, and having a family where my father was injured early in life at work, so I really turned to wrestling, and it was a saving grace for me in many ways. Bruno was actually the role model for me. Again, we're going back now to the 1960s, late 60s, early 70s, when we had 3 or 4 channels in television. And I lived in the Philadelphia area, so we picked up wrestling, which was WWWF at that time, on Channel 17, Channel 29. A lot of times watching it through fuzz and snow, but just enjoying pro wrestling and really having someone like Bruno. And my father was like a role model for me, but after he got hurt, I needed to look towards somebody else. And Bruno was a guy who really almost represented my father, stood up for things that were right. Sometimes things were tough, but he always managed to come back and do the right thing. So that's really what got me started in the wrestling business. An interest in wrestling, rather. And then we started a little backyard thing. And, we used food coloring for blood. It was, we have steel cage matches with fences that were already erected. But it was something, it was, right now, I mean, I don't know whether you know my background, but also have a degree in psychology, and I worked as a licensed counselor here in the Massachusetts area. But if I were to go back and look at it from a psychological standpoint, that was really my way of acting out a lot of my, I guess, anger, disappointment, being able to set something up for myself to where I was able to work through some of the issues I had as a kid. And wrestling was it for me. And then when I got old enough to begin to travel in the wrestling business, not in the wrestling business, rather, but travel. As soon as I got my car, I started heading to Philadelphia to the arena and watching the TV tapings. And boy, that was wonderful. It was free in those days. You got a little white ticket to walk into the Philadelphia arena. They would put everybody on the one side, and they would take 3 shows. But boy, what a night, what a wonderful thing. And then on Saturday nights, I believe it was once every 2 weeks, they had a major event, and then they would bring Bruno was the champion, and he would be there every other Saturday night. I would sit right at the entranceway, wait for him to come out to shake his hand, and even made the eye contact with him a few times. It was wonderful for me as a kid. So that was really it for me for the wrestling bug. That really got me started in the wrestling business.
Did your family have any issues? Because you alluded to your father becoming hurt. Did they have any issues of you getting into the business? Because of course, like, whilst it is entertainment, like there is risks that you take all the time in there.
There are, but they really didn't have any. In fact, they viewed it, I think, as being fake.
Yeah,
they viewed it as being something that was not a real sport. And then what became interesting is when I did start up my own organization in that area, in the Allentown, Bethlehem Easton area of Pennsylvania, I actually had my father come on and portray himself as the president of the organization a few times, as he had some things. So I tried to get, family members involved, and they actually really enjoyed it. I had my brother as a referee a few times. I had him licensed with the state, and we had a show at the VFW post in Easton, Pennsylvania. And my brother went in. It was like his second night of working as a referee, and things got kind of hot there, got kind of heated. He ended up getting hit in the face with a hot dog, and mustard splattered all over his face. And he came out to me. He said, I'm not doing this again. I'm done with wrestling." So that was the end of my brother was a referee. But it was I tried to get the family involved as much as possible.
In terms of your developing the Mad Dog DC Drake character, two-part question: what was the inspiration for that so memorable? And I'll get into it in a bit, but my first contact with or awareness of yourself was through the wrestling magazines, and that persona really jumped right out. So first part of the question is how did you land on that particular persona?
Well, I actually started out in the business as a baby face, and that was more because it had to be, where I was doing it at, and because I was actually doing the business. I ran a TV show. I did the TV production with a local cable company. I was also running around the businesses and setting up shows, doing a lot of work with VFWs and school booster clubs, etc. So I had to be the good guy. I had to play that role. And then when we moved from the company that I had started into the National Wrestling Federation, that's when I decided at that point that it would be better off for me to be a heel, because we needed a heel for that for the organization. So initially, I wanted it to be perhaps a seriously mentally ill deranged person. I tried to model it someone after Kevin Sullivan and King Curtis, because again, as a kid, King Curtis scared the living daylights out of me, even though I thought I knew what wrestling was. Whenever he came out and I saw the foam from the mouth, and he just scared the crap out of me. So that's who I really wanted to model the character after. So I first brought it out at a show in New Jersey, and I just took I wanted to look kind of crazy. So put some eye shadow under my eyes. It looked like I had bags under my eyes, like I was just doing drugs all night. And when I came out and acted the character, some of the fans were saying, "That guy's a mad dog. That guy's a mad dog." And that really ended up with moving away from that and moving into the Mad Dog character. So that's really what I stuck with for the rest of my career.
Yeah, very, very memorable. Part two of the question is you touched on the National Wrestling Federation, and one of the opponents that again I followed in the magazines that you worked was the late great Bruiser Brody. Just wanted to get your input on those matches and working with him just in general, and in terms of, we've heard he could have been temperamental and whatnot. We're just wondering what your relationship was like with him.
Well, to touch on the National Wrestling Federation just a little bit, I was a booker for them. I was the TV producer for them. I actually started with Bob Raskin, who was the promoter, who came to me. So we started to put that whole organization together with the guys that we had from the independent organization I had in the Pennsylvania area. And then all these big names started to come onto the scene, and that's who we started using. Brody, my relationship with Brody was actually very good. And I traveled with him when we did shows in different areas. We never discussed wrestling much. We discussed finance. We discussed other things, because I had a career outside of wrestling as well. And it was interesting when we were alone to think we discussed kids, family. I never had an issue with Brody. And one of the reasons why, I can't speak for others. For me, as for Brody, as well as working with Slaughter and other people, I respected where they were in the business. I had something I could always fall back on if I left the business. They didn't. And so even though I was a champion for National Wrestling Federation, I never wanted to go over on people, so to speak. I didn't want to build myself up on others because I had something else they didn't. That was their life. And that's the way I looked at it, working with these guys. We always had good shows. We always had good endings, finishes for the matches. But I never wanted to make anybody look bad, because they were going to be there long after I left.
Yeah. Was there ever a consideration from you, Don, to go into wrestling full time for good, like, or did you always want to kind of have a back project to fall back on?
Well, the NWF was full time when we were running it. It really blew up as when we started. We had a number of TV outlets. We had booked, I think it was 86, maybe 87. We teamed up with a company called Creative Entertainment out of Camden, New Jersey. And what they did was initially their whole thing was running, bringing in musical talent for fairs. And so the summer, they were booking summer fairs all over the country. So they picked up National Wrestling Federation and started booking us as well. Then we got involved through them. We were able to add some TV contacts. And we really had a decent organization, a decent thing working for us. So that was pretty much full time for me. When I started to explore other areas, this was, again, we're going now into the late 80s, early 90s. There was just no money in the business at that point. I mean, I liked traveling, but it got old quick for me.
Yeah.
And so when I walked away from the business, I just wanted to pick and choose where I went. You know, it was, I did talk to other people. I spoke with Japan multiple times. I did go over there, but not with a Japanese company. I was able to travel, but I did not choose to do it full time, and nor was there any money there. I mean, I talked to guys who would tell me, you know, they were starving. They were on the road starving. And I had a family. That was something I really did not want to get into. As much as I love wrestling, I had other obligations, and that's really what ended up making me leave the National Wrestling Federation. And then I was out of it. I started my own organization again called Pro Star Wrestling, using a lot of the guys that were free agents, so to speak. But again, it was after the fair. The money just went quickly. Wrestling started to fall off, and at that point, I said, "I'm done with promoting. I'm done with wrestling." And then that stayed for about a year until Joel Goodhart opened up the Tri-State Wrestling Alliance.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about Joel and how you first came into contact with him, because he seemed to make an immediate impact, again, with the magazines and the coverage and very high profile talent coming in, but to back it up to how you became involved with that organization.
Well, at the time, Joel had a radio show in Philadelphia, again, where I lived in the area, on WIP. And I would listen to it, and it was entertaining. It was very good. He was a businessman, obviously. I mean, he was a very smart businessman, but he was also a wrestling fan and really into wrestling. And he started running these shows, and then I called him up one day, just asked him, you know, how are things going? I'm listening to your show. It sounds really good. You know, here's some guys I used to use. Are you interested in using any of them? And he said, well, what about you? And so he booked me against Larry Winters, because Larry and I had multiple matches with National Wrestling Federation. And Larry was really his mainstay, you know, in terms of the local guys in the Philadelphia area. And that's when we actually got started there. And that turned into almost every show Joel ran, it was Larry and I. And then other independent promoters picked us up too. So it was that's how I started with Joel.
Do you have a particular match that you look back on in your career and be like, that's my favorite match, or do you have a favorite opponent?
I think Larry Winters had to be my favorite opponent, but I also enjoyed the matches I had with Jules Strongbow. It was an immediate feud between he and I when National Wrestling Federation started getting in TV time. And my goal when I started with the National Wrestling Federation, my goal was to really put our local guys on, along with the big names, and at some point be able to wean off the names and just have our local guys build up. And we almost got there. It was probably 1987. We were very close with a company out of Camden, New Jersey. I think they were called M&M Syndicators. And we were supposed to sit with them, and they were talking about wrapping us up, putting us a package together with HR Puff and stuff. And again, I don't know whether you guys remember that show or not. It was a kids show, but it had clearance in almost 90% of the country. And they were talking about packaging us with them. Now, I stayed out of that business end of it. I did the wrestling end, but the guys that were involved in the business end, they were never able to come to a really decent agreement with M&M. And that was more about who was going to be the executive producer, who was going to do this, who was going to do that. Nobody wanted to let go of things. And at that point, things just fell apart. But I think we could have really did okay if we got a hold of that deal.
In terms of Tri-State, they get, or that organization gets a lot of credit, and I think rightfully so, historically for bringing the hardcore wrestling phenomenon to national attention again. And I mean, it wasn't invented there, obviously, but certainly experienced a renaissance. And I'm thinking of the matches between Eddie Gilbert and Cactus Jack and those bloodbaths. Just wanted to get your thoughts on the hardcore wrestling phenomenon as it started there and then moved into ECW, etc.
Well, I remember the first match that Larry and I had, and again, we were looking at, again, drawing the attention to Tri-State because that's what we wanted to do. You know, Joel knew about the matches with Eddie Gilbert and a lot of the guys in other places, so we brought a lot of those matches in. But then we wanted to have our local guys. So Larry and I think it was probably the first match we had at Temple University. And I had Larry throw me off of not the bleacher. It was on, it was second level. He threw me off into the concrete floor down below. And again, now I never did anything stupid. I always planned stuff out. I always knew where it was going, where it was landing. And it was impressive, but it didn't hurt. But I remember Bill Apter, I believe it was Bill Apter, who wrote in his magazine that what he saw escalated the violence in wrestling, having Larry throw me off that balcony. And that's what we were trying to do. And at that point, Joel had, when he ran shows, he had a mixture of hardcore along with just regular matches. But it's nothing like it is today. I mean, it's really escalated today in terms of hardcore. And, but that was our goal. We wanted to get some attention for the organization. And moving into ECW at that point, I had left because I wrestled JT Smith, and he had given me a suplex, and I came over, I landed on my head. And at that point, I suffered a pretty serious injury, a brachial plexus injury. And that was it for me for wrestling for quite a long time. So I was done at that point. And then somewhere along the line, I wasn't there for that. That's when ECW ended up, Tri-State moved into ECW.
Maurice?
Yeah, just on ECW then, how did you end up kind of going to that organization? Was that an easy process, or how did it happen?
I only had one match for them.
Mm-hmm.
And it was they called me up. They were doing a spot with Cactus Jack and Terry Funk. I think they call it Funk in the Box. I think that was the title of the show. And they wanted me to go out with Nancy Benoit. And I went against Cactus Jack. And the whole thing was that once Jack pinned me, Funk was going to attack him. Nancy would call him in, Funk would attack him. And we went through that was what got me back there. I did that match. I really wasn't in shape, nor did I plan to do anything more. I know Paul Heyman wanted me to work a program with Tommy Dreamer, but just sitting in the ECW locker room that night, I knew I didn't belong there. It was a lot of drugs, a lot of drinking. That's something that certainly I did not want to be involved in. I'm not being judgmental of anybody, but it was something that was not my background, especially given the work I did. So I said, no, I'm not interested in that. And when it comes to Paul Heyman, and I'm not sure if a lot of people know this, we employed Paul Heyman in the National Wrestling Federation. We gave him his job as an announcer for us. And even before National Wrestling Federation, we had Paul Heyman in for the small group that I had in Pennsylvania. Paul would come in and he would do little TV shots for us. And so we were working with Paul. I know he was involved in the business before he got involved with us, but we actually had Paul involved with announcing. Paul, we had him work as a manager for a couple of our matches in National Wrestling Federation. He managed myself and Damian Kane in a match against the Fantastics in Reading, Pennsylvania, which was on TV. So we've, we had Paul involved in the NWF before he went to WCW.
Yeah. And was it the environment was the reason that you didn't want to come back then and work for Paul with, say, the program with Tommy Dreamer?
Yeah, it certainly wasn't Tommy. It certainly wasn't that at all. It was the environment. It was just a crazy locker room, out of control. It was the place reeked of marijuana, a lot of alcohol. Again, that was their thing. That's they openly brag about it today. Sandman, and that was their claim to fame. That certainly was something I did not want to get involved in.
Yep.
You touched on a moment ago, Bill Apter, and I just wanted to get your impression on the role that the wrestling magazines played in terms of building your mystique. And I think back to publications like Wrestling's Main Event, where they had full color TWA spreads, DC Drake, etc. What was that something that that you lobbied for, advocated for, or did it just kind of happen, so to speak?
It really just kind of happened. The wrestling magazines of those days, that was it. If you were in those magazines, it was great. I remember as a kid, and again, talking about the magazines, I would stand outside a store in my hometown and wait the day that they were coming in. I couldn't wait to get in there and buy those magazines. The bloodier, the better. I mean, I enjoyed reading that. It was wonderful. And, again, I imagine people can't relate to it today. There was no internet.
Yeah.
There was no social media. There wasn't any YouTube. So the magazines was where it was at. I mean, I would read the Ring. I love them all. The Ring was a magazine I used to really enjoy because in the back of the Ring magazine, they always had results from around the country. So I would sit there and I would read them and read them and say, boy, I wonder what it was like to be at that match. I wonder what it was like to be there. And they were just special. The magazines were just special. And I never lobbied for them. I just had people come to me, like Carmine Despirito and Bill Apter, and they liked what we were doing, and some of the stuff we presented, really looked good in the mags, and so it was just a natural. I think I would not at the time. I would have had no idea how to lobby for that. But then after a while, some of the guys came along, and it was just a great match, and so things worked out well. But the magazines, oh my gosh, I can't. They were magical. That's all I could say. That's how I viewed them. And I know it's hard for people to understand today, but that's where it was at if you were a wrestling fan.
The only downside to the magazines are when you move several times, like I have, and have about 16 boxes full, gets a little heavy. But yeah, it's something that was magical. You're right that some of the younger fans are definitely not are missing out.
There was just something, even with, again, I'm old and I know my way around computers and everything, but there was just something special about being able to sit or lay in your bed and read the magazines and then lay down and put your head up and look at the ceiling and imagine, gee, what was that like? Everything is there for you today. So if you want to see Abdul the Butcher wrestle so-and-so, look it up on YouTube. But to sit there and be able to sit back, look at the pictures and close and just look at the ceiling and say, and imagine what it was like. That was part of the mystique. And that's what I think is missing in wrestling a lot today. That mystique is missing. It's hard to explain to people, but it's just it was just something special. When they came to town as a kid and you went to see them, the smell. We used to go to an arena, the Philadelphia Arena, for instance. You'd walk in there, the sweat, you could smell liniment, the hot dogs, the popcorn, everything. I mean, it was a sensory experience about wrestling, and that's what made it magical.
Yeah, I think we can all agree. I think we can all agree that the internet has ruined the pro wrestling world for everyone. I think there's too much information out there from even from the big companies, and you have to wonder how this stuff gets out there.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've noticed is, you have your heroes, you have your baby faces, but the fans are so smart today that they get mad at the booker. So if there's something happening, they don't get mad at that. You don't get the heat on the baby face or the heel too much anymore. They get mad at the booker for the way the match was booked, and they talk about it. Oh, the booker should have did this. How do you get? You wanted the real heels, and when I grew up, you hated them. You knew nothing about a booker. You knew nothing about the shows being, how they were booked. The heel was where your anger was. And today you read, it's every place else. Well, they should fire this guy. The booker should do this. The guy, it's people are too smart. I think that's the word that to say. But yeah, it's ruined. The mystique is gone.
Was there ever a moment, Don, where you could have went to any of the other bigger organizations such as WWF at the time and WCW, or was that ever on the table?
Well, NWA, I think it was when I was in they weren't there when I was getting out of the business. I did speak to some people about WWF. That's when they found out that there was just no money. It was really not good in those days. And again, I wasn't as much, like I said, as much as I love the business, I had a family, I had another career in the back, so I said this, I can't be on the road, hearing stories from guys I spoke to, where they would sit in hotel rooms and a can of tuna and no money to send home. And, it was not what I wanted.
Yeah.
I read that you worked with the late great superstar Billy Graham, and was wondering what that experience was like at that stage of his career with his I take it his mobility was compromised at that point as well.
It was. I mean, he was again a great guy. We had him on many shows. Never had an issue with Billy Graham either. He was just a great guy. And when I worked with him, it was just kind of sad. We were getting ready to work, and I sat down with him and said, let's go over what we're going to do. And I remember he said, I'll never forget, he said, "Dog, just don't knock me down." And I said, that was really sad for me to know that he was at that point in his life. He would go down on his own, but he, and I understood. And I had nothing but respect for these guys, and again, because I grew up watching them, and I wouldn't call myself a mark. I don't think I ever was a mark, in terms of being with them. They were just somebody who had a job and were at the end of their careers, and that's all they had. I mean, I would listen to them talk, and I'd say, I can't, I don't want to hurt anybody. That's what it came down to. I just did not want to hurt anybody or do anything that would hurt their image or their career. And when he said that to me, I said, wow, I couldn't imagine myself being in that position. And so, yeah, I don't think there's anybody that I've ever dealt with that I would say I would never deal with them again.
In 2012, Don, when we were researching for the show, we discovered that there was an incorrect report that you had passed away. And this goes back to maybe people writing on the internet and maybe knowing too much or not knowing anything at all. But how did that rumor come about? And obviously that was probably upsetting for your family to see something like that online.
Well, it was. The way I think it came about was my father's name is the same as mine. So when he passed, which was just a little bit before that, I think there was an obituary, and then there was I think there was something else that was written about him, that somebody bought something in a newspaper. And I think that's the only thing I can think of is where that started. And I remember, and it's kind of funny. It wasn't funny for her. My sister called my phone. I was at work, and she said, "You're alive?" I said, "Yeah." "Why?" And she told me the story. I said, "Well, what did you call me for? If I was dead, I wouldn't answer the phone. So why'd you call me anyway?" So, yeah, it was I was up here in Massachusetts and they were down in Pennsylvania, so it was they got the information. And yeah, I'll never forget that phone call. That's when they first heard about it.
Crazy.
It is.
Speaking of controversy, I know you had a match with Rock and Rebel where you won the TWA championship, broke your ankle. Again, heard a lot about him, notwithstanding the terrible events that ended his life. Just wondering what your experience was dealing with him, because from again, internet gossip information or whatever, he could be extremely difficult to deal with.
He was difficult to deal with. He was very stiff, very hyper all the time. I only worked with him 2 or 3 times, but it wasn't. I was always afraid about getting hurt with him. I couldn't trust him a lot of times because he would get himself to such a state, so worked up, that he would just forget what he was doing. Sometimes he would push you, where you shouldn't be pushed. And yeah, he wasn't a bad guy, but when he was in the ring, he was, well, obviously after the fact, now we know he was a bad guy, but in terms of working there, he wasn't too bad, but he was hard to trust in terms of trusting your body to him inside the wrestling ring. And the way I broke my ankle was I ran him into there was a steel cage match later that night. I ran him into the cage that was set up outside the ring. It was leaning against the wall. And the cage, the whole thing, there was like 6 sections, fell and smashed my ankle. So it wasn't something that happened during the match. It was just doing something stupid that ended up smashing my ankle. So yeah, it was that's the night I believe I won the title too, if I'm not mistaken. I think he had Baby Doll with him, and I had Nancy Benoit with me. And then at the end, Baby Doll turned on him. I believe that's the way the match ended. But yeah, he was very difficult. It was not you couldn't trust him in the ring.
Yeah. Do you have any memories of Nancy? She's obviously a hot topic in the wrestling world, and it was very sad to how she left this world. Do you have any personal memories of working with her?
She was always very professional with me. I have no real stories of anything with her. We did a couple TV things in the Philadelphia area before the shows, but she was always professional, always nice. Again, I knew of her through Kevin, so, and you hear stories, you hear rumors, you hear these things. I just didn't put much stock in that. And I've never had an issue with her, and always viewed her as a professional, and she did what she had to do and moved on.
Yep.
One individual I've had the pleasure of interviewing several times and just picked up his book is Todd Gordon, and wanted to know if you had any anecdotes of dealing with him at that initial period prior to Eastern Championship Wrestling.
I knew Todd, but I wasn't involved with Todd too closely. I know he and right before I left there, he was really spending a lot of time with Joel. I don't remember how he got involved. I think he started I think he was a manager at one point for some people too. But I never really had much of a relationship with Todd, other than knowing him and seeing him in passing. He got more involved after I left down there, and then that's when he got involved and ended up, I guess, buying TWA, or I don't know. I just again, I read some things and I saw some stories about how that all came about, and I'm not sure how true it was or how untrue it was, but my dealings with Todd were, again, very probably off to the side. I never really had a close relationship with him.
Fair enough. Maurice?
Yeah, we were reading some quotes online, Don, and you can clarify if they're true or not. It was just a few quotes about CM Punk crashing and burning in the business multiple times. Is he someone that you know, or are you just kind of basing this from just the way his career has gone?
I base it on the way his career has gone. I mean, you can almost tell that he's a problem. in the locker room. And again, I'm basing it on things I read and basing it on some of his behaviors. Um, you go from one place to another and the same behavior follows you. You got to ask yourself, who the problem is. Now you can say stuff again. I'm not an expert on what's happening today. I only watch it, occasionally or stay up on it by reading on the internet. But even if I hear the AEW locker room's out of control, I read that and he walked in and created a problem. But then he also had a problem in WWF, and you ask yourself at what point do you say that the problem is everywhere? If you go to any job, and I was just telling somebody today at the place I'm at right now that every place has problems. There is no wonderful job in the world, whether you're wrestling or you're working in a supermarket. And I do oversee the staff where I'm at, and I say to them, just before you criticize things here, just open your ears a little bit. And I had somebody say to me today, I did that. I went to a convenience store and people there were complaining about the job. I went to Walmart and people there were complaining about the job. Everybody complains. And so there's no perfect place. You make things work for you. And, I do think that Punk has a problem. And the old saying back in the day was you believe your own publicity, and I tend to think that may be one of the issues there, and I think you can look at that when he went into cage fighting into MMA, that again he thought that he was maybe more than he was, and turned out he wasn't. And so if you believe your own publicity, or whether it's again wrestling or you're working in a convenience store, if you believe that you're more than you are, you're going to run into problems.
Yeah. On the flip side of that, Don, is there anyone that you look at from briefly looking at today's modern wrestling, you think that's the guy, or is there any guys that out there that that you think are on top of their game?
Well, I'll tell you, I don't watch a lot, but MJF, I think he's a wonderful talent. I just started going to some independent shows in the area, and I see some great independent wrestlers. But if I'm going to look at somebody today and say this is an old school guy, it would be MJF. I would say that he'd be a guy that if I wanted to start an organization, he'd be a guy I'd grab right away. I certainly love his approach to the business. I love the way he works. I love the heel behavior all the time.
Yeah.
And it turns people off. I read where it turns people off. Well, you know what? That's the way it used to be. That's the way wrestling was. And if you don't like it, then maybe you don't like wrestling, because that's what wrestling was always about.
100%.
The last kind of historical question I wanted to ask you, being in Canada, Great North Wrestling, my company is based in Canada. I read that you wrestled Rick Martel up here, and wanted to get your memories of that. Being he's one of the greats that this country has ever produced in a lot of people's opinions.
I wrestled Rick at the London Ontario Fair, and again, you're from Canada, Jack, so you probably remember it was right around the time that there was a tornado up there that was in that area that was really bad. We were staying in Detroit, and when I went over to wrestle Rick, I remember there was a lot of talk about a tornado that occurred up there in that area, and that's how I remember it. But I know working with Rick, again, very professional, knew what he had to do, to make me as a champion look good, but also make him look good as well. So it's such a pleasure when you work with a guy who's a professional, understands what the business is about, and not only wants to look good himself, but wants to make you look good as well. Because if you do that, then everybody looks good. It looks like it's an entertaining match. So my one time with Rick was I'll never forget it. It was a great match, and again, nothing negative to say. We also worked in Montreal a few times. We did a tour out in Saskatchewan,
Hmm.
We worked up there. We went into Saskatoon. I think that was we went kind of again. I don't know Canada that well, but it was a much different type of wrestling fan there in that area.
The prairies, yes.
Yeah, versus the where we worked in Ontario and other places. So, but yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah. For fans that are wondering, then, Don, from seeing you on TV and over the years to being a wrestler, and they want to know, like, what do you do now? Like, what's day-to-day life like for you?
Well, I actually retired from a job. I was a licensed clinician working with addictions in Massachusetts. And I worked with HIV patients and at Shattuck Hospital. I retired from there, and I said, I'm going to start my own consulting business. And what I would like to do is I would like to go around to different programs of social services, some of them that were probably struggling a little bit, and do my best to try to fix some of that. And then once I thought things were going good, I'd move on. I ended up at Shattuck Hospital. Really enjoyed working with the AIDS patients there, and that's where I stayed till I retired. About 6 months, I decided to open up my own consulting business. Doing that, going in and rebuilding programs. My first client was an attorney in Rhode Island, and it wasn't that he was doing very well, but he wanted to bring staff together a little bit more and do some staff building. And that was my first job, and I never left there. So I've been there ever since for years. And I do a lot. I run the website. I do presentations for them. I do some teaching with nurses around addiction, elder law. That's what he does. He does elder law. And so my day is basically, doing marketing, working with staff, working with some clients. I work on the website a lot. I do the blogs. So I stay very busy, and I'm very happy. Retirement was not for me. 6 months and I was done. I was ready to go back to work again, but never in the ring. That's over.
Yeah. That's the final sort of question I wanted to ask you. If you could delineate down your wrestling career, be it whatever capacity, what aspect of it, because it sounds like you were one of the the rare individuals that could leave wrestling and make a break for good. But what was your number one either highlight or most prodigious accomplishment?
In my mind, it was having fans believe in what I was doing. Yeah. It was being able to go out there and get them so angry at me, get them so mad at me. And then, one of the things that I always did was pick on somebody. I would pick on fans. I would pick somebody out, but I always pick somebody out 10 rows back, 15 rows back, where they couldn't get to me. And that way the other people in the front weren't, I wasn't worried about them attacking me as long as I was picking on somebody else. We used to have a guy in Bricktown, New Jersey, in the New Jersey area. He used to come to all my matches and he hated me. He had a glass eye. And I say that not to make fun of him, but I would get on him, I would call him Crystal. So he would go everywhere where I was, and he would just get on me. So one time I got a letter from him at the office, and I opened it up, and there was a picture of him with his eye out, holding it to the camera. And I said, you know what? That's fun. He's having a good time, and he's saying, you're on me, I'm going to be on you. And that's really what I think was what I enjoyed the most, was making sure the fans had a great time, making sure the kids had a great time. Because I remembered how wrestling helped me. I wanted it to be there for them with whatever they needed it for, whether it was just for entertainment, whether they needed it for somebody to be a role model, whether they needed to hate somebody because they had things happening in their life. I wanted that to be an experience for the fans. And that's the thing that probably stands out more in my mind than anything else.
Excellent.
Yeah. Yeah, Don, if the fans want to keep in contact with what you're up to, do you want to give a shout out to your websites or your social media handles?
Well, they can find me on Facebook at DC Drake. I'm on Facebook. If they want to shoot me a letter, they can do it to where I'm working at right now. It's probably easier than Another one, it's ddrake@connollylaw.com. I don't have a website. The website I do is for the law office, so that's the one I run. It's Connolly Law. And if you're interested in reading blogs about health, about legal stuff, I try to cover everything in that blog. And again, it's, you guys understand websites, how they work, so it's important to have new content all the time.
Yeah.
But it's not just about law. It's not just about advertising. I tap into my career. I've had stuff on there about wrestling. So if they want to read that, they can go to Connolly Law and go to the blogs and see what we write about. So that's really the best way to reach me. And Facebook, like I said, DC Drake, they'll find me on there.
Well, Don, I want to thank you very much for your time today. It's certainly been an interesting discussion, and coming from a fan of your work, I've learned a lot and appreciate your time today.
Oh, I thank you guys for remembering me. It's it's something. And when I walked away, I said, no, you still have an ego. You know what I mean? As much as you say to yourself, it's over, there's still a little bit that feels really nice when somebody remembers you and remembers your work. So I appreciate you guys, doing this. So you don't know how much I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. And in closing, I just want to say that I think you're probably the most sanest pro wrestler we've ever talked to.
At least for now. We'll see what happens. I'm getting old, so who knows what's happening down the road. So, but thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks a million, Don.
Well, fans, that's it for another edition of the Cheap Heat Productions Wrestling Podcast. Until next time, thanks for tuning in, and take care, everybody.
Thank you.